Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making, back with another full build video, and in fact we have another dual build video. Today we're going to be building a pair of F-86 Sabres from the Honduras Air Force. Now, just to be totally transparent here, I actually built these two kits about 4 months apart, and I'm going to be jumping back and forth between the two builds, so it might be a little confusing at first which one I'm working on. Eventually it'll become more apparent. And for both of these builds, I am using the Academy 1/72nd scale F-86 Sabre kit, both an E and an F version. And I will be using decals provided by Aztec Decals. Fantastic decals, highly recommend them. They've got decals for tons of South American Air Force, or well, not just Air Force, but military schemes. Very, very high quality. The kit itself is, it's pretty basic. It's not a terrible kit. It's not a great kit. It's just kind of somewhere in between. I mean, overall fit's pretty good. It's got okay detail. It does have engraved panel lines, which is nice. But it is lacking in certain areas. Some of the areas are just kind of like soft on details, or there are some areas that are just straight up lacking detail. So a little bit of work is required. Now, the history of the two airframes that I am making, so I'm making airframe 3001 and 3002. So these are the first two F-86s delivered to the Honduras Air Force. And 3001, to commemorate their newly arrived Sabres, was given a special paint job. So that's that white-blue paint job that you saw in the very first picture there. And it has the stock ejection seat. So you can see here that the plastic part is extremely simple and crude, so this requires a fair amount of detail to be added to it to kind of help really liven it up and show the full, well, not the full, but show more detail than is provided. So for this, I'm just using various little bits of evergreen styrene in various shapes and strips and little squares and stuff. For the most part, I'm just cutting this all out with my hobby knife and to the right size and shape, and then applying it on. And here you can just see I'm trimming some parts that are a little just excess off. And doing this kind of scratch building, it might look intimidating at first, especially on such a small scale as 1/72nd scale. But it really isn't that bad. And I find the best way to learn how to do it is just to try it. Try and find a simple part on your model that could use a little extra detail, and try just adding little bits of plastic to it. And I mean, you can see here that I'm pretty much sticking to geometric shapes, squares, triangles, things like that, to then build up slightly more complex shapes. So it's pretty doable, and I think it's a good way to start getting into this type of scratch building. I am also using some extra photo etch harnesses that I had in my spares to help dress up the seat as well, just make it a little nicer. Now for the second airframe, 3002, they actually ended up upgrading the ejection seats to Martin Baker Mark 10s. So here I am using Aries resin ejection seat. And the first thing you have to do is remove it from the casting plug. So I'm just using my little razor saw here to do that, and then get it all cleaned up. But the Aries resin seats are extremely well detailed. I mean, just flawless casting. The detail is amazing. At 72nd scale, you can even see like subtle ripples in the cushion on the seat. I mean, it's beautiful. And it does come with some photo etch. It's extremely small, so I'm just securing it here with some CA glue, some super glue. And typically when I'm doing seat belts, photo etch seat belts for a seat, I get them attached to the side or the upper seat or whatever, wait for that glue to cure, and then bend it into place. I just find that causes fewer problems. These ones, I did anneal these ones ahead of time because they're not pre-painted, so they were a little bit easier to bend and to get them to sit down correctly. Annealing is basically where you take a flame source to the photo etch and heat it up so it helps make the plastic or the metal a little bit more malleable. I avoid doing this on the pre-painted photo etch just because it would ruin the pre-painted look. But I mean, you could certainly do it and just paint over it. That's always a possibility. Just something I haven't done before. The shoulder harnesses were a little strange. The instructions weren't very clear on exactly what I was supposed to do with this kind of little like extra strap thingy, and some of the reference pictures I saw kind of showed it looped around. Honestly, not entirely sure what it's for, what its function is, but it looks good once it's on. So there we go. That's all the photo etch applied to the seat. Like I said, it looks really great, especially considering how small it is. And I knew this would be fun to paint up. I also added detail to the wheel wells and the cockpit using basically the same techniques I used on the first ejection seat. It was kind of hard to find good reference pictures of the wheel wells for the F-86. So I kind of did the best I could based off of what I had, and a little bit of artistic interpretation. The cockpit was a little bit easier. There were specific details I was able to add to the cockpit based on reference pictures. So again, just using plastic and some lead wire. Moving on to painting, everything was given a nice coat of black primer, which basically also is the base color for everything in the cockpit. One of the exceptions being the Martin Baker seat, which was painted gray. So here I'm just using some Vallejo US Air Force gray to get that painted up. Everything else remains black. It's kind of boring when the entire cockpit is black, but we have a few ways to kind of help spruce that up. So here you can see I'm dry brushing the black parts with a kind of like a medium gray color. This will just help get a little bit of a highlight onto the edges and the raised details in the cockpit. And I apologize for the harsh light there. I don't often film during the day, and I just had a bright sunlight coming through the window above my workbench. But basically the idea is just to kind of give everything a nice dry brush. It'll just help pick out some of those details. It also helps give the black kind of a worn and used look as well. So now we can move on to painting the details in the ejection seats. Because the ejection seats are really going to be the only source of color in the cockpits, I wanted to make sure I was doing them well. So I'm just using various Vallejo acrylic paints here to get the ejection seats painted. You'll want to make sure you're checking your references. I mean, you're going to find pictures of all different shades of green and tans and whites and stuff for the ejection seat. So just, check your references, find one you like, and go with it. Here's the other seat getting painted up as well. I do like a lot of the early jet age aircraft that had a lot of red in the seats, like on the cushions and stuff. I think it just helps add like a great pop of color to it. Getting the straps painted up with some green here. So this does really go a long way to helping liven up the cockpit a little bit. And now we can hit some of the buckle details and stuff with some silver paint or like a metallic paint, and that'll kind of wrap up the painting on the ejection seats. The kit does not come with an instrument panel decal, so you're left to having to paint it. I stuck with just a dry brush. It was going to be really hard to see the instrument panel, but I did want to add some glass to the instrument faces, so I'm just using some clear UV resin and just basically dropping it on there with a little bit of wire, and then I think it kind of helps sell the effect a little bit. So moving on, we can get the cockpit attached to the fuselage. Overall, the fit here is pretty good, but there's no like solid locating tab to get this in there, so you kind of have to work it around to make sure that it's sitting evenly within the space of the fuselage. So definitely test fitting the halves together is a must. Now, this aircraft is somewhat of a tail sitter, so it's important to add nose weight. You should be able to get enough nose weight in there above the intake trunking and just behind the cockpit to make it not sit on its tail, especially if you're going to be having the full intake open. If you're choosing to use the FOD covers over the intake, then obviously you can stuff some weight inside the actual intake trunk itself. I'm doing one of each, so the camouflage Sabre will have the FOD covers on, and the blue and white Sabre will have them off. So you just have to make sure that you're getting enough nose weight in there. It really doesn't take that much, but I tend to always be a little overcautious when it comes to adding nose weight, just because I've been burned in the past with not adding enough. So once the cockpit's in, nose weight's in, we can kind of move on with the rest of the construction. The exhaust pipe goes in here. Again, it's pretty simplified and obviously way shorter than it should be, but I mean, it gives you the effect that you're looking for. And then we can put the fuselage halves together. Like I said, the fit here is generally pretty good, all things considered. You will have to do some filing and filling and sanding on the seams, but it wasn't terrible and really didn't take that long. But right now I'm just adding little pieces of tape to help secure the fuselage while I glue it, so that I don't have to constantly be holding like hard pressure on it. So for the glue, I am just using the Tamiya extra thin cement. This is just my general workhorse glue, and it does a great job of what it's supposed to do, gluing things together. Definitely recommend. I know Mr. Hobby has a similar glue, and I'm sure there's other similar glues out there, but this is the one I like to use. Also, don't forget to drill out the holes for the drop tanks. If you're going to use the drop tanks, as far as I know, most Sabres pretty much always had the drop tanks, so just don't forget to do that. And we can glue our wing halves together. Fit of the wing halves is pretty good. They're pretty simple. The F version does not have deployable slats, but the E version, you do have the option of having deployable slats. So just be aware of that. So here we can go ahead, once the fuselage is glued together and cured, we can go ahead and start sanding. And I'm starting with a file here. It's a jeweler's file, and I use this to kind of hit the real rough parts of the seam, get it ground down to a point where it's easier to actually use some sandpaper or sanding sponges, and then I slowly refine it and get it to the point where it's looking good. On the upper part of the fuselage, I really didn't need any filler, just a little bit in front of the cockpit there where I'm sanding at the moment. There you go. The underside did require a little bit of filler, especially around the wing joints. This is one area where the fit isn't great, so you do have to do a little bit of trimming of the lower wing box in order to get it to fit onto the fuselage correctly without too much of a step. So definitely you need to make sure you're dry fitting that process to make sure to get it on there. Now we can install the intake, the front intake. I'm glad that this is a separate piece and that you don't have to deal with a seam running up and down the front of it. So props to Academy for doing it that way. You do see that I have the sprue gates on there. I will eventually clean those up. It was just easier to clean them up on the aircraft. Now, you do get the option of having the speed brakes open. However, Academy has done it incorrectly, where they have them deployed straight out from the fuselage. However, on the actual aircraft, they should deploy with a downward angle instead of straight out. So the fix is simple, and it's basically you just trim one of the little door attachment points, and then you should be able to fit it at an angle which is more correct to the actual prototype. Now we can move on with completing the rest of the construction. Tailplanes going on, getting those fit on. Pretty simple. They fit really well. We can get the rest of our cockpit put together now that we're done with all of our sanding and filling and everything. I find it easier to do that before, and now we can get our canopy on. Fit of the clear parts is generally okay. Didn't have to do a lot of modifying there, so that's pretty nice. And in fact, the gun sight glass was actually really nice, and kind of surprising that was included by Academy. So props to them for that. Masking off the canopy, you definitely want to make sure you're using a brand new fresh blade. That will be the easiest way to do all the trimming on here, so that you're not overly gouging the plastic and not ripping your masking tape. So I'm just basically going around the perimeter of the canopy with the strips of Tamiya masking tape, trimming it off, and then eventually I will fill in the rest. You could either fill it in with more masking tape. I like to use a liquid mask to do the rest of it. I feel like it just gives a less variables for paint to bleed under. When like if you're using lots of little strips of masking tape, there's always one little piece that gets up and you get paint on there, and that's annoying. So yeah, pretty straightforward. At least on the Sabre, the canopy masking is pretty easy. All right, so now we're going to split this up a little bit. I'm going to paint the camo version first, and then we'll do the white and blue version next. For the primer here, I am using Alclad's gloss black base, and this goes on really well, really easy, and does a great job of highlighting any imperfections you may have left on the plastic. So just be aware of that. But that's a good thing, because we want to be able to see where we may have missed a seam or some sanding marks and get those corrected, especially if you were doing it like a saber like this in the natural metal finish that they normally wore in the US Air Force service. So you'd want to make sure that you're getting all those, and that gloss base does a great job of doing that. So now we're going to do a little bit of mottling. This is kind of our pre-shading technique here. Just going into the interiors of all the panels with some white paint. This is highly diluted, so it's not very strong, and this will just help kind of break up the solid colors of the camouflage, just to add a little bit of variation into the surface. Now, I won't be weathering either of these aircraft very much, so this will help just add a little bit of texture and variety to the aircraft. So now we're going to do the underside color, and for this instance, I'm using this color called Stonewall Gray. This has a little bit more of an earthy tone to it, and looking at the reference pictures of the Honduras Air Force Sabres, the gray definitely stood out to me as being a little bit different than like your typical SEA camo on an American aircraft. So I don't know if that was just an artifact of the photos, but this is what looked like, what matched best. So here we're just doing all the undersurface areas of the aircraft, getting a good coverage on there, but trying to show a little bit of that pre-shading show through. And now we can move on to our actual camouflage. And so based on the reference pictures and the decal color callouts, I'm following the pattern they had there, and just really going through with this highly thinned earth color, and getting the spots that I need to get. I really enjoy doing the SEA camo, and this is the first time I've done it in 72nd scale in a while. I did it on an A37 years ago, but this is definitely going to be a much better version of it. And I'm using the standard colors that I've used on a lot of my other SEA camo builds, with one exception. So this color here, Reseda green, I actually grabbed the wrong green. So this green is way too light for a good SEA camo. I didn't necessarily catch that while I was painting, so I pretty much go through the whole paint job with this color on, and then afterwards realize that it's not correct. So you'll see once you see the full thing with all the camo on, you'll see why it just doesn't work right. But you know, it happens from time to time where I grab the wrong paint bottle, and when you've got so many different colors, sometimes it just happens. So now we're going to go with our darker green here. I am using Blue Tack Poster Tack as my masking here. I wanted to get pretty close to a hard edge camo without necessarily going like straight up with tape. So this is kind of the next best thing, because it still gives you a good like demarcation line, but it also has a little bit of a feather to it, just because the rounded nature of the blue tack helps it do that. It's also important when you're doing this kind of camo to keep track of where each color is going, because sometimes I've masked something off and then painted where I was supposed to be covering. So you have to be careful, be mindful of what you're doing so that you're painting in the right spot. All right, so here I have decided to repaint over the incorrect color. So you can just see that light green is it's too light. It looks wrong. It just doesn't work. So I'm going over with this camo green, and kind of the camo green in conjunction with that lighter color really came out nice, and I'm pleased with the final result, and I think it looks much better. So it's just taking my time going over the paint, and I did lose a little bit of my hard edge camo line on some of this. I probably should have got the blue tack back out, but trying to get blue tack back over the same demarcation line is really hard and to make it look good. So I just decided to freehand it. But happy with it in the end. So here's the final results, and this is looking much better, at least in my opinion. Much more happy with that. So now we can move on to the other one. So the other aircraft, so this was a special commemorative paint job, and it looks white in the pictures, but I have it on good authority that it was actually very, very, very light blue. So I'm using some Tamiya XF1 here, and then literally just a drop of blue in there, just to give it like that tiniest hint of like sky blue. And this is going over a gray primer. Since I wasn't going to do any pre-shading with this, I didn't want to be spraying, such a stark white over black. That would just be too hard and require too many layers. So over the gray is much easier to work with. In addition to this is the gloss color, so it goes on really nicely, and it allows me to, save myself of having to do a gloss coat before the decals because this is going on gloss. I did thin this out a lot, so it did require a couple coats to go on and get me a good solid coverage, but I did get there eventually. And very little masking on this because pretty much the entire aircraft is this extremely light blue. And then it has a few accessories here, like the drop tanks here. They're actually going to get painted a slightly darker blue. So this blue is actually just another mixture of that white and blue combination, just obviously with more blue added in. To match the reference pictures. So I really like the look of this one. It's just unique for a Saber, and I think it looks really cool. So another cool thing about this paint job is it has these two great blue stripes going down the side of the fuselage that start at the top and bottom gun barrels, and it looks really cool. So I've got this masked off, and I'm painting those stripes again with that same blue that I did the drop tanks. And it's simple, but I think it looks really good. There is on the very nose of the aircraft, though, is I believe it's the radar gun sight. So you have to paint the little, where the actual radar receiver is. This gets painted black. It's the same thing on the other Saber as well. And, but other than that, pretty simple paint job. Now we can move on to decals. The decals on both of these kits are really straightforward and simple. I did end up doing a little bit of stencil work on this one here, just to kind of help break up the overall white look of the aircraft. And then the only other markings on here are the actual registration markings here and the Honduras flag. So those go on. You will notice that the one is missing from the number there. That's because I had to kind of jury rig it and cut up some decals to make that work. And I had to try a couple different ones to make sure I got the right size and width that fit with the rest of the decal, but did get there eventually. This one I didn't have to do any modifications. This one comes with 3002. And again, the markings are pretty simple. There's not a lot to it. So just got to make sure we're getting them in the right place. This had very few stencil markings on it. I imagine that's just because when they got these aircraft, they were freshly painted with the SEA camo. But one cool thing about this one is the unit badge here painted on the speed brakes. I really like this. Kind of a neat detail, and kind of just helps make it unique. So once the decals are on, we can hit them with our solvo set. This will help settle the decals down into all the details and panel lines and really let them lay flat on the model. And so I just go over all of the decals with the solvo set. This stuff is pretty hot, so you don't want to like really flood it on there. It can melt decals. So once the decals are completely dry and cure, I hit them with some gloss coat to seal them in and protect them from the weathering process. So I did this on both aircraft, and even though the white one is already gloss, I still wanted to protect the decals, so it does get a nice coat of gloss. And you can see I've already installed the drop tanks and the landing gear struts. It was just a little bit easier to kind of paint this all together, and instead of having all these parts individually. And now we can move on to pretty much the only thing I'm going to be doing for weathering is adding a panel wash. This is some Flory Dark Wash, and this just gets applied liberally all over the aircraft. It settles in nicely to all the recessed panel lines and all the detail. And this was my first time using it, and I was quite pleased with it. It was pretty easy to work with, and I think it does the trick well. So the camo in here, I was going to be a little bit more dirtier with it, just because this would have been an actual active frontline aircraft, whereas the other one was, at least initially, just used for show and would have been kept pretty clean. Removing the excess wash is pretty simple. You just use paper towel with a little bit of water on it, and all the excess wipes off fairly easily. The nice thing about this Flory wash is it's actually really durable. You have to, you can't like rub it off with like a dry towel. It has to be a wet towel to rub it off. So even handling it just with your fingers, you're not very likely to rub any of it off. So it's pretty durable, but at the same time, with a little bit of water, it does rub off easily. Some of the hard to reach areas, I will get in there with a cotton swab to get those areas, but for the most part, I can just use the paper towel to remove all of the wash and get it all cleaned up so that the panel wash just stays in the panel lines. So at this point, we can start adding all of our final details and removing the masking from our canopies. This is a fun part of the build for me, because this is kind of like, all your hard work starts coming together, and you can start seeing the final result take shape, and it's a lot of fun. Plus, removing masking can always be satisfying. I did have to do a little bit of touch up here where the canopy was temporarily glued down, just to kind of clean this all up, just because a little bit of it will be seen with because I plan on doing the canopies in the open position. So we just needed to clean this up and get it ready so that it would look nice with the canopies open. So here I'm just using a little bit of black Vallejo paint to touch up these areas and excuse me, and make them look nice. The FOD covers going on the camo saber. Again, these are included with the kit, so it's kind of nice, but there's really no like proper locating parts for it. You just have to put it in and hope it doesn't fall into the void of the intake. So I'm using super glue here just to kind of tack it into place, and then I'll hit it with some Tamiya extra thin. But it helps add a little bit more color to the exterior of the aircraft. And now we can start adding in our landing gear. So these were all painted separately, obviously. Again, the detail on the actual landing gear struts and the wheels are really nice. It's just the landing gear bays themselves were a little void of detail, so I've added some structural detail in there and some plumbing and stuff. So canopy can go on to the white and blue saber here. Looking good. We can get the speed brakes on to the camo saber. So with the white and blue one, we really wanted to maintain like the sleek line, so that's why I had the slats closed and the air brakes closed. But on this one, really wanted to kind of show off some of the cool features of the kit here. So we have the actual speed brakes themselves are fairly well detailed out of the kit, so very, very nice, and kind of helps add a little more uniqueness to both kits. Now we can get the ejection seat installed and get that put in. That's just tacked in with super glue, and then finally we get the canopy of the camo saber. So both these kits are really good. The final detail I wanted to add to the camo saber here is some removable for flight tags. So I'm using these Babibi, not quite sure how to pronounce that, 3D decals. So these work like a decal. You soak them in water and you remove it from the backing paper, but they actually have thickness to them, and I'm just super gluing them on. Really easy to use, and they're actually printed on both sides. I'm still not quite sure how that works, but again, helps add a little bit more pop of color to the exterior of the aircraft, and just make it look like it's on the flight line, just about ready to go. So got some of those removable for flight tags on, and that wraps up both of the builds. So yeah, great little kits. They're fairly inexpensive. I think they're about $14 or $15 in the US, and you know, with a little bit of extra detail work and maybe a little bit of aftermarket, they can build up really nice. And I like both of these schemes from the Honduras Air Force. They're just not something you're used to seeing these the sabers in, and so I really like them. They're unique and different, and they stand out. And I'm quite pleased with how both of these turned out. If you've made it this far into the video, I really appreciate you sticking around. If you can manage to sit through 30 minutes of my rambling and mild stuttering, I appreciate that. If you liked the video, hit the like and the thumbs up button. Consider giving me a follow if you're not already subscribed, and let me know what you think down in the comments below. I do enjoy interacting with you, and I answer every comment, so I'd love to hear what you guys think. And additionally, I do need to shout out my patrons for helping support this channel and for allowing me to bring content like this to you. If you are interested, the members of my Patreon do get to see these videos about a week early, as well as ad-free. So I would urge you to consider helping support the channel. But if not, just your viewership is greatly appreciated. So we'll see you on the next video. Take care.